Hello, welcome to the latest installment of the MUD Parcel Reading Series. This series is a video companion to the MUD Proposal online journal and archive, which is currently on its 10th edition. The MUD is annually updated and features poets and projects that are international in scope and multidisciplinary in focus. So you can find everything online about the series at the mudproposal.co-op.com. I'm Pat Clifford. I'm social worker and producer of the series, and my co-editor, Aryanil Mukherjee, is here, not visible, but he is here as the host and discussant. We're joined today. We're happy to welcome Subhro Bandopadhyay. Subhro is a multilingual poet, speaks, wait a minute, I'm reading the wrong bio. I have the wrong bio, but you are a multilingual poet, speaks many languages, including, of course, Bengali, English, and Spanish. Author of 5 books of poetry in Bengali. 4 were translated into Spanish and got published in Spain. Received the Antonio Machado International Poetry Fellowship from the government of Spain in 2008, and the Indian National Award for Young Writers. The Sahitya Academy is a Yuva Puraskar. You can correct
Right.
me
Yes.
if I'm wrong. For his collection of poems. And he participated in international residencies abroad and was invited to distinguished literary festivals in India as well. So welcome, Subhro.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for
Anything you'd like
having
to
me.
add to your bio?
No, nothing. Nothing.
Guess you're joining
That's
us
it.
from Delhi, correct?
Yes, I'm joining from Delhi, and well, there's one point is left. I earn a living by teaching Spanish as foreign language. So that's the only point that could be added to that note. Thank you for the introduction,
Awesome.
and thank you for having me here in this reading, this prestigious series of reading, because we all are associated with the Bengali part of Gaurav, but not with the English part. So that's thank you, Pat.
That's great. So I think you're going to
So
kick us off with the reading, so I'll step back and then the floor is yours. And then when you're completed, we'll come in for a discussion.
all right. Thank you,
Good.
thank you. Then I'll start the reading. I'll read it from a book called in Bangla. It's called Kacher Shorbonam, and in English the tentative title should be Glass Pronouns. And I'll I'll read a poem from the series called Glass Pronouns, and this is the translations that I did from Bangla to English with help of the Indian English poet Ranjit Voskore. You are a broken song nailed to the body of April. This rocky fall of morning is shivered glass, exposing, liberating you to a fragrance of boiling rice. A tune is born on the line of dawn when the metallic trunk of a leafless tree grows violently. Can the shadow of my cheek still offer flesh? To whom? Why do the fletched blades fly towards the refugee camps? The time curdles on the yellow of classical music. Tell me, the old song are now letters to be read alone? Number 2. You could have been a blue leaf sometime. Your design trade path towards towards the pilgrim's pale robe vanishes into a glass cloud, colored. It is the ancient language that breaks in the silence of a white flower. The evening that remained floating, is it the sound of your ankle? Is this awaiting the rounded vibration of cowbells in a valley? You are a broken song nailed to the body of April. From the same book, there's another section called Middle Poem. This is a translation done by Aryanil Mukherjee. I tell myself to aggravate ferocity, Folks I had chosen to be worse with last year, folks I had toiled more to be hostile with this year, who put tongue against the blade, everyday feet entwined by the sun, not submissive mornings, but sparkling afternoons, arranged my books before orderly rows of insecticides, unwritten absences of buddies on the pages. Would you go elsewhere? Effortless stops to choice of descending from the bus. Alleys proximate. Early arrival of stray dog catcher vans that howled by. You watch the dreaded tremors of saved animals. Every day, do you think about that? Hate the compulsion of going to work, the desire to not look at the mirror is aging by habit training. From the same section, this is also Aryanil's translation. I have woven together these thoughts with myself. They fall inside of me in continuous moonlight between blade and its metallic sound. How far do the years transport it? Perhaps this is how events shape time. Grammar makes language with a plasticity, alive at the instant before bullet shatters glass. When I can touch its palpitation and wonder if it was long before, does the language rupture too? And splintered skin shows wounds of the mother tongue. Again, from Glass Pronouns is a from the same section called Metal Poems about presences. It is not broken yet. We are walking through a lawn covered with glass. Why do we have to hide the dew on the bodies of questionless evenings? You moved away without saying anything. Serenity occupied your space. Your name is nowhere, only your presence. Number two, I stabbed a broken piece of mirror in my proper noun. No search is left, neither answer nor direction. Is a piece of stone enough for the self? You are the sole recipient of the presence that isn't there. Dog days. What do we whisper to ourselves? The ruling party drops a cadaver indifferently. Will my friends in the city believe it? I did not want a tropical breeze along the Arctic gate, but when the bones curve through the finger, my hands want to hold something. There is only decay in the stony construction. What do these mongrel days find scratching the dusty roads in the chest? That the last poem was translated. I translated this with Rajit Naspore. Again, I'll read a poem that I translated with Ranji. The road is decayed at both ends. Nothing but this room and some firm footsteps around the door are left. Some key sounds. This habit has its own name, homecoming. I convince myself that there is nothing to be afraid of. All the singing evenings have become boxes. Tunes are absorbed in the cardboard brown. A bent head and some torn handwritten slips get jumbled on the second floor balcony. A heavy, still grey pale is called late afternoon. I should have moved already. Why can I still hear some voices from these doorless houses? All these poems belong to that section of metal poems. I do not understand what these houses symbolize. Perpetual wounds on skin and perpetual return from the threshold. It is scary that I know myself. I'm standing here even after I'm done with the process of burying all the waste paper and woolen heaps I had. This park, this all devouring broken syntax, even ever slimming line of imagination, and a steel body in a sand dune, a hand of glass. I feel happy to know that I'll never see the truth. This is a poem. Now I'll read the poem from my probably my first uh, book that I can still claim my book, because before that I had two chapbooks published, but this is probably the first book that I'll call myself, but call my book. The book in Bangla is called Chitabak Shohor, and in Spanish, that was written in Bangla and translated to Spanish. That was called. It was written in a residency program in Spain, so because the Spanish name comes to my mind first. In Spanish, it's called La Ciudad Leopardo, and in Spanish and in English, it's called Leopard City. This is also my translation with that I did with Ranjit Moscow. Leopard City 1. Our evenings were full of valleys. While walking with the glass poems through the rain, I don't know when I fell into the life of an old sculptor. On arriving from a distant country, he discovers that his wife has given birth to a stillborn. Her metallic vagina bleeds. He whispers into my ears. When the wild man was not accustomed to one woman or one man, he discovered the oven, and the grey has entered the food. After this, we find blades in the lyric. Afterwards came the moving away, the attack, the defense, the land, the offspring, the seed, running away from the village until getting to a new place. What did the man think when he saw the sea for the first time? When there was no atlas? The darkness of the Romanian accordionist in the plaza transformed into harmony. Summer shines on the knees of women and breaks pieces of these images, with sunbathing in the belly. The entire city is already a spaceship. Where does the leopard go with its hunt hanging from its mouth? And I'll return I'll end this reading with the same Leopard City, number 3. This poem has a social connotation that when I was there in that residency, like every year in the summer, they find there not only in summer, also in winter, there are people who try to cross the Mediterranean Sea to get to the coastline of Spain and Italy and Greece and other countries. And when I was there, I suddenly saw in a newspaper that in a boat they found 11 dead people crossing the Mediterranean in the Spanish coastline. Leopard City 3, it was dedicated to those 12 people who found dead on the coastline. The old town is actually like an old man's brain. Countries, nationalities, lanes, alleys entwine. Sultani Delhi is burning in front of Nadir Shah. The Santo Domingo Church. Spanish ships still have not arrived in the Caribbean. A Guatemalan girl returns from the marketplace from civil war. After all this, I look at myself. Some cypresses have grown on dry lines of thought. The summer, the bright nurse, is with the weak boy. I keep open the last doors of poetry. We fear some broken rafts and some living migration in them, cadaver. The letters are candescents now. A rain of ash on the womb of silence. The night is in flames with pine, wine, and garden. Where to place all these elements in our thorny atlas? Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, all of those kind
Thank
of
you very
amazing
much.
here. I feel like we've taken an international journey and a metaphysical one as well.
I must still one little thing about this last poem. There's one more reference there of Nadir Shah.
Nadir Shah, yeah. I was just thinking about it, yes.
Persia, Sultan of Iran, who came to India and organized a kind of slaughter in Delhi.
Hmm.
And well, Sultani really refers to that Turk era of Delhi, early, it was early 13th century Delhi. Delhi is it's a city of 1,000 years. And there is one more thing that the Santo Domingo Church that has a local reference to that small Spanish town where I was in that residency program. And that's one of the oldest Santo Domingo churches in the entire world, probably if not the oldest. And Santo Domingo is the capital of Dominican Republic. They have also their 16th century church of Santo Domingo. So I had that. That was La Española, the island that was the first island where Columbus reached and proclaimed it as India. So there are
Yeah.
3 Indians there.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And this book, this particular book, Leopard City, was like, I must tell it here, it was practically written under the tutelage of this single human being. We call him Captain, Mr.
Okay.
Mukherjee. He was always there, like a guiding beacon there. No? So, and because I was at least very nervous what to write and what not. The first time I was writing some kind of like going out of my comfort zone and typical Bengali scenario. So
Yeah.
that was a tough choice.
Well, maybe that's something to talk about, is the importance of kind of community, in the creation of poetry, the necessity of having that kind of apprenticeship or that guidance, the person who will help guide you, or the community that will help guide you. And I know Korab has been that for many people, and so maybe a little discussion about the importance of that with this connection in particular, but maybe a little bit of the history of that movement as well, and how it's still going on.
Like I must tell my part here. It is like then Aryanil would come with his previous experience and things like that. Like Bengali poetry, sometimes it can be a little. You can, if you read it, it's a very diverse poetry in itself. But it's very, and Bengali as a language is a very lyrical language. It's like Italian, so it's difficult to experiment with the traditional structure of the poetry. Although we had poets who worked on the structural aspects of poetry, but Korob, literally what they did was, in the early Korob poets, they are for us the younger generation, they started to experiment with the syntax, with the Bengali syntax. So it is a kind of, for us, for all of us, it was a kind of attractive, who try to break free from the shackles of traditional poetry making process. And then, like, and for me, Arjunil, like I was, as a student of Spanish language, as a student of like, I started learning Spanish to look for other kind of poetry, and because I grew up in such a milieu, I must say, where English was not my first language. Neither was I comfortable with uh, English reading English poetry, especially from the US. It was difficult for us. So anyway, I was trying to, like, English was still accessible for us, but I wanted to try a different landscape altogether and discover the Spanish scenario, the Spanish, the entire language scale, from Spain to South America, everywhere you go, like, Spanish is the lingua franca. Like, where you two are, that's probably a friend of mine, a Cuban friend of mine, he told this prestige that French enjoyed throughout 20th century, Spanish enjoys in 21st century, thanks to the US. That's the language of the intellectuals in the US. That might be true. I don't know that you two live there. So what I can see, this Spanish, Latin American studies, Latin American literature is taught almost every university. So there are experts, and there are, most of the intelligentsia of the Hispanic world live in the US. So they teach creative writing, literature, philosophy, history. They are the leading writers of Spanish language, but they live in the US. So so all the newer generation of Chilean poets, Mexican poets, they live, like, in between Mexico and the US. So it's like, so it's they are there. So, like the presence of what was Paris in the 20th century, probably New York is probably any other, San Francisco maybe in the 21st century.
Mhm.
But the language has changed, not the language of the place, but some other language. But anyway, what I was telling is, like, I was into that kind of scenario, and Arjun introduced me to the experimental writing of the US, and he always insisted on, like, looking for experimental writing, like the poets who were not the mainstream icons, not the prize-winning writers, but look for some other faces. So I luckily I got into the Spanish poetry scenario through the poets of, say, we can call it not so mainstream poets. But anyway, in literature is not anymore mainstream anywhere except the best-selling books. Poetry is far less. So they didn't have that. Like in Bengal, you still can find the poets who try to sell poetry, and but in Europe and in the US, the poetry
Yeah,
is for the poets.
that's
That's it.
completely out of question.
Out of question. But the thing is, in Europe, what I saw is a very interesting thing that I never saw it in, neither do I see it now in India. In Europe, poetry is completely funded by the government, so they get some sort of fund from the government to get the books published. So
Mhm.
that's a different thing altogether. That changes the entire scenario.
Let's jump into your poetry. A couple of things I want to mention, and then one particular question to ask. So first of all, Shubhro, thank you for your sweet compliments. But let me go back to that book you read from Glass Pronouns, and the second book you read from is Leopard City, Ciudad Leopardo,
Leopardo.
Ciudad
Leopardo.
Leopardo, Ciudad de
Leopardo.
Leopardo, or Ciudad
No,
Leopardo?
Ciudad Leopardo.
Okay. Or
I use the word leopard as it is as an adjective as I did in Bangla.
Ciudad
Leopard.
Leopardo. Okay. And could you explain why you chose why and how the word leopardo comes here?
That's the typical story that I told you long time back in 2009 when I published the book. Like
Right.
I was in that small town in Spain, and I was probably
It is called Soria, right?
it is called Soria, right? It is called Soria. That's a place. It's a historical town because of many things, but because of mostly in 20th century, it was for Antonio Machado, a giant of 20th century, and that to a parallel giant. He became giant later on, up almost after his death. So that's a different thing. But Antonio Machado, I was there in that town, and I was in a building, probably the tallest building at that point of time in Soria. Since it's a small European town, they don't have high-rise buildings. So I was in a building. I was on the 8th floor, and that too on a hillock. So could see from that 8th floor. I was from the 8th floor towards the center point of the city, and there's a kind of central park in the city. And from a distance, when I one fine morning, I discovered the park under the bright sunlight of summer in Spain. I discovered the park as a huge leopard resting.
Wow.
So that uh, so that so
That was
from
the
that
metaphor.
image,
Okay.
that was the image
Okay.
came from.
So I would like to just quickly jump back to that time. I think it was you went there in 2006.
2008.
2008, okay. Around 2006, we had met
Hmm.
online. We had not met in person. And I think we first met when Pat and myself went over to India in 2008.
2009.
Oh,
2000. Yeah.
8,
We,
right. End
yeah,
of 8,
end of eight.
first,
I
2 years.
I came back from Europe into early
yeah,
2009. So that was your last 2 3 days you were there, and we met
right. And you had just returned from Soria,
from so right.
right? So what got me really interested in this particular trip that Shubhro made to Spain was that he became the first Indian language poet to be invited to some place in Europe by an European country to write a book of poems in Bengali, uh, about his stay. So it was, and he got a grant for that. So it was a very interesting, strange grant. Actually, the book finally came to exist in both languages. Spanish as well. He wrote it in Spanish and then it was translated to Bengali.
No, it's the other way around.
Oh, other way around. So he wrote
I
it in Bengali and that got later on got
and
translated by himself into Spanish. So something like this had not happened in any Indian language whatsoever. And so during the writing process, that made me really, really curious as to how something like this would happen. I do not even know of any American poet who has had a similar grant. To go over to another country and write about his stay there, live there for a few months, and write about his experience, make a book out of it, and being funded by that government, right?
Yeah.
So that was what the
Why
grant
that
was
last
about.
part is the more rare.
Right.
No, there are American
Because there
poets.
might be residencies and other things, but yeah, an actual government sponsored event that.
Event on poetry and not painting or installation art. So that was very rare. So I used to call him, once a week or so to find out what is he thinking about and how is the writing process going. So I still treasure those conversations, interactions.
And almost every week we talked and I shared every single poem that I wrote.
Right.
And finally,
Yeah,
and
your
from
personal experiences, right?
from first draft to the final print, we like everything I shared, and almost every single poem of that book is published in Korab. So,
Yes,
uh,
right.
and the rest is unpublished. If there is that they're not on Korab, so they're not nowhere. So
I see. Right. So
so
yes,
that
so the Korab online magazine and also the Korab print journal was still alive. So we published most of his writings. It was quite unique, very unfortunately, and as always is the case, um, in most of Bengali, in mainstream Bengali literature, this incident, this experience, this book had almost, never been talked about. And so it is really,
nobody really knows about it. It
nobody
is
really knows or even cares to know. So these are the rare histories that need to be absolutely preserved. And I'm glad that we're doing that as we speak.
as you say, it had to be preserved. It is very well preserved in Soria. It is in Spain. It's like
Mhm,
in 2019 in Soria. I went to their Expoesia poetry festival that happens there, and there was an exhibition. There's a Spanish photographer
mhm.
who accidentally chanced upon that book when he came to India, and he made some photographs dialoguing with my poems.
Oh, wow.
So yes,
Wow.
and in
Mhm,
Soria municipality in that festival, they organized an exhibition of those photographs along with the poems with
mhm.
which he was inspired to take those photographs, and they framed the entire dialogue as a 10-year celebration of that book.
Documented by the foundation there, or
Yeah, it is documented by that Antonio Machado Foundation and the municipality of Soria. It is very well documented. It is like I was the first non-Hispanic writer to get a grant in Spain to write a creative writing at a creative writing residency. Normally, those are for Hispanics, people from all over the Hispanic countries. They go to Spain, and Spain has a lot of had at least till 2010. They had a plenty of those grants, and
And this
uh,
was funded by the Antonio Machado Foundation, right?
Antonio Machado Foundation and the
And the city of Soria,
Minister of Culture, Government of Spain.
government of Spain.
The city of
And
Soria organized my stay. They found me the place and everything, whatever I needed. But yes, the Soria is a very, very friendly city. It's a small town. When I was there, the official number of the official population of Soria was 24,000.
24,000.
So
Population
from
density wise, right?
population density,
yeah.
Kolkata is the third most densely populated city in the world. So from there, and in 2008, probably Kolkata was the fourth or maybe third. I don't know,
Mhm.
but I was there and I discovered that it's like Soria was the nobody. Where are people? So that was my experience. So
Mhm.
I never
And
saw any.
I think it's also worth mentioning a couple of sentences about Antonio Machado
Yes.
for the English speaking audience.
Mm.
That he's one of the tallest poets in in Spanish language, and a long history, and also remembering Jerome Rottenberg, who has recently passed. In his Poems for the Millennium collections, there is quite a bit
Machado is
about,
there.
yeah,
Machado.
it's quite a bit about Antonio Machado. So if the name is new to you, I think
Yeah, I must
one should
mention
go in.
I
Yeah.
must mention a few things about him because he's the one who initiated Lorca's interest in folklore. So and many things. He inspired like a whole generation of poets. He was literally his poetry is revered and rediscovered after the Civil War. So he was
No,
like a saint. He was like a sage poet,
this
hermetic one,
the
living in
Spanish
Soria,
Civil Wars. I see.
Spanish Civil War of the 20th century. So he lived in Soria in that high altitude town, detached from the entire world, teaching French in the local school.
Mhm.
And Spanish poetry was dominated by Juan Ramon Jimenez.
Mm.
Jimenez was the name for wherever you went, you found his name everywhere.
Jimenez,
So
who also
Jimenez,
lived in the United States for many years,
half of his life he
half
lived
of
in
his life. Yeah,
the US.
uh,
Mm.
was a Nobel laureate in
Yes,
poetry. Mhm.
he
So,
was a great poet, but he wrote a lot of his body of work is huge. But in comparison, Antonio Machado's complete poem is of 300 pages.
mhm. Right.
Interesting.
And he practically made that place north of Spain, Castilla. He placed that unnamed world into the Spanish map. They call him the poetic cartographer. That's a vintage thing.
Cartographer.
Poetic cartographer
Interesting.
uh, of Castilla.
Now,
So
another thing which is worth mentioning, there was a big change in his writing style and content from this time onwards, this um, book onwards, Leopard City. And then all of the writing that he did, and along with a few others, went on to eventually give rise to the concept of circumcontentive poetry, which again was much more focal, which was housed in Jacket 2 and did not receive much importance in the place where this came from, where the writers came from, which is Bangladesh and Eastern India. Um, so that kind of speaks to the audience we serve there, and the importance and the geography of where we get the importance from. The compendium, which was I'm so grateful to Jacket 2 for publishing it, and especially Sarah Dowling, who worked with me during the entire time. That compendium, I was recently looking at it in terms of the number of pages. It was like about 150 pages with poetry and
prose.
prose. Right? And also a very interesting coincidence, around the same time, conceptual poetry came into being. I mean, they were publishing a great deal of white papers and things of that sort. And I did get in touch with one of those poets, Vanessa Plus, or Place. I don't know how she pronounces the name. It sounded French to me. But yeah, and she did acknowledge that, yes, there are interesting intersections between these two brands of poetry, if I'm allowed to call it that. So anyway, at the end, I would like to ask you one question, Shubhro,
And maybe
from
we're
class.
getting towards the test, so maybe this is the final question. So,
Yeah, this is the final question.
and if she wants anything to add.
And the question is about the naming of your book, Glass Pronouns. So why did you call it Glass Pronouns? It is important to mention to the non-Bengali reader of your poetry that in Bengali language, pronouns are gender neutral. So it is, you don't know the gender of the person he's
Well,
referring to.
he or she, you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was one thing. And secondly, glass, when I hear the word, or when I even think of using the word glass, the first thing that comes to mind is transparency. But then while delving deep into your work, I realized that, well, it's not that characteristic of glass that you are
No.
focusing on. It's probably the brittleness
The
and
brittleness,
the
the fragility, and
fragility of the glass.
and the violence on a glass. No, that was the violence on a glass that you found in the poem that you translate. That bullet wound on a glass, on a windshield of a car and stuff like that. Well, this name came from that fragility because the pronouns are probably the most intimate words that human beings have. All the personal pronouns. When we call each other, when even we refer to ourselves, that is probably the most intimate call that we can, the word that we can have in any given language. And that series, the entire series, Glass Pronouns, which I have written, when I wrote, I had a kind of a distant relationship with my wife. I was here in Delhi and she was in Kolkata, and I wrote them as a kind of love poems, but they never turned out to be love poems. But I wanted them to be love poems, but they never became. So
Love poems in a traditional sense, right?
yes, love poems in a traditional sense. Like if you think of a love poem, you think of um, those 20th century versions of love poems. But I don't have that ability to write them like they were in 20th century. But anyway, those poems came and I wrote them, and I explored the intimacy of pronouns and their state of being fragile, and that's the most fragile call. That like you can in English you don't have it, but in Bangla and in Spanish you have it. Like for instance, the second person pronoun, we have three second person. We have tui, that is the most intimate and most close, and then comes tumi, the second in the order, and then comes apni, the foremost. In Spanish, you have tu, that can be equivalent to tui and tumi, and then comes usted, that is for. And just you change that from tu to usted. If you open any Spanish dictionary, usted also means a call for a distant people, call for a distant people who is not close to you. So
which is the same way in French.
yeah, tu and woo. It's the same concept. And in English you don't have it. So, but in Bangla we have it. So a slight change, not even in the syllable. That all those words are monosyllabic. A slight change of word that can make a relationship shatter like anything. Yeah, because it's the most fragile and most intimate. So the name came from that, and finally it became what it became. And I still haven't translated those poems that we wrote again with, like I was writing that cycle, and we tried to create an issue, like we created an issue in Korab about cinema and poetry. Half of these glass pronouns were written in conversation with Wong Kar-wai, with with his films practically, and 2047 basically. That was, and In the Mood for Love. Those are the two films that are involved in these poems. In like I read only two, those are translated, and later in the series you can find images and things directly taken from those two films, and those are there in Core of Film Poetry. That would quote a classical poet from the 19th century. Like Oscar Wilde was on a trip to Greece, and he was stopped by the Greek customs there, and they asked, "Do you have anything to declare?" He said, "I have nothing to declare but my love for Greece." And and I say the same thing, that I have nothing to declare but my love for mud proposal, because love is the password of Koro that we used to say when Marinda was alive.
Well, I don't think we could top that. So that's amazing. It's been a great conversation. It's great having both of you together really discuss these, not only read these poems, but discuss how they were generated and how they're supported and how we can continue to spread the word. So thank you, Subhro, for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers out there. And please join us soon for another installment of the MUD Parcel Reading Series.